Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Skazurovia, ID 242101060010. In this video, I will answer several questions about my experience with this grammar exam, especially conditional sentence and direct and indirect speech. Question 1. What is the purpose of this interview? In my opinion, this example is quite interesting because I have experienced assignment or exam that, that required students to create their own question before. Therefore, I was not too surprised by the format. However, it was still challenging because I had to fully understand the material before creating the question and answer. I think this method helped me understand the material more deeply than simply answering ready-made questions. Question 2. What was your first reaction when you heard about this exam format? My first reaction was quite calm because I had previously done a segment or exams that required creating my own question. Therefore, I was not too surprised by this exam format. In fact, I felt more prepared because I already had an idea of how to do it. However, I still felt challenged to create good questions that met the material we had learned. Question 3. Were you anxious, challenged, or confused? Since I had done a similar assignment before, I was not too envious or confused. Instead, I felt more challenged to create good questions that match the material. However, I was still slightly unsure when choosing the most suitable context or example to use. Question 4. How did it feel to think like a lecturer? It was quite difficult because I am usually the one answering questions. This time I had to think about how to create reasonable questions, make them relevant to the material, and provide correct answer. Question 5. What was your biggest challenge? For me, the biggest challenge was finding real-life situation that matched the required grammar pattern. Sometimes I had an idea, but it did not fit the grammar structure. Question 6. Can you walk us through your process behind the scenes? I usually start with my personal experience or situations I often encounter. Then I mate them with the appropriate conditional sentence or direct and indirect speech. After that, I create the question and answers and check the grammar again. Question 7. Did you gain any new awareness about grammar? Yes, I realized that grammar is not only about memorizing rules. We also need to understand when and why a grammar structure is used in certain situations. Question 8. How is this different from going textbook exercise? When I learning from a textbook, I usually focus on the finding the correct answer. However, when creating my own question, I thought more deeply about how grammar is used in daily life, which helped me understand it better. Question 9. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself and why? I would give myself an 8 out of 10 because I think I understand the material quite well and can create my own question. However, I am still sometimes unsure when changing direct speech into indirect speech, especially with tense change. Question 10. Was it difficult to evaluate yourself? I thought about what I had learned during 2 semesters and which part I still need to improve. Evaluating myself was quite difficult because I had to be honest about my own abilities. Question 11. Why do you think the reflection section matters? I think reflection is important because it helps us understand how much we have learned and what we still need to improve. Through reflection, we can become more aware of our strengths, weakness, and learning progress. And the last question is question 12. Finally, can you compare the cognitive experience of answering a lecture made question versus creating your own contextual question? In my opinion, creating and answering my own contextual grammar question was a different experience compared to doing question made by a lecturer, since I had done a similar assignment before. I was not too surprised by this type of exam. However, I still found it challenging because I had to think carefully about the context and make sure that the grammar structure were used correctly. When I when answering a lecture made question, I usually focus on the finding the correct answer required me to think more creative and more deeply about how grammar is used in the everyday life. I had to connect grammar rules with my personal experience and real life situation so that the question will be more meaningful and relevant. Through this process, I gained a better understanding of the material, especially conditional sentence and direct and indirect speech. I also realized the grammar is not only about memorizing rules and formulas but also about using language effectively in communication. Overall, these tasks make learning grammar more interesting, improve my critical thinking skill, and help me understand how grammar can be applied in real life situations. Thank you for watching my video. That's all about my experience with this grammar exam. I hope this reflection can provide useful insight about learning grammar through creating context question. Thank you.